Thank you, Scott. And as we've already done the kind of introductions, we can skip over that bit now. But I will tell you that I'm a full-time user researcher, and what I'm going to talk to you today is about ways to improve user research working in Agile teams. So if you're working in an Agile team and you're supporting a live system, you can put features out there and design A/B tests to find out what works and what doesn't work. And you get good numbers of users coming along clicking things, so you can feel confident in the findings that you've got there to make your decisions about what you're going to go forward and do next. But if your system isn't live yet, or if you've seen the user behavior and you want to know why, you want to know a little bit more insight about user behavior, that's where user research comes in to help you out with those answers. But user research is always with smaller numbers of users. So how do you get robust findings, and how do you get real confidence in those findings so that you are confident in making the decisions about what you're going to go forward with that? That's what I'm going to talk about today. And I'm also going to bust some mantras today, and no apologies for that at all. And it's not because those mantras are wrong, it's because some of them are just limited in their scope. The goal of my talk today is to give you 3 ways to improve user research that you can take away, and when you do your user research in your Agile teams, develop more robust findings so you can be confident in the decisions you're taking forward. And if you're familiar with the mantras, and if these guide what you do as a team, that you can take away and you're able to ask intelligent questions about whether they're relevant and appropriate for your current project or for the current stage of the project there. So let's jump straight in. What we're going to talk about today, 3 ways to improve your user research. Number 1 is agree your research questions up front. Number 2, script and practice your sessions. And number 3, perform each session independently. We're going to jump straight in here with number 1, agreeing your research questions up front. Now, there's a bit of a mantra out there that any form of user research is better than none. Why can't we just get some users in, stick them in front of it, see what happens? Well, what's going to happen is that you're going to get a smattering of findings, a little bit over here, a little bit over there, but no real patterns. Nothing that's going to help you give some solid evidence to drive forward what you're going to do. Also, if you're not quite sure what the research questions are that you're after, you might recruit the wrong types of users come in, and anything you learn from them may not be solid evidence that you want to actually take forward. The benefits of working together to agree your research questions beforehand means the whole team is on the same page. You know what it is you want to get out of the research. And that impacts everything you're doing for this user research. It helps you identify the users and recruit the right people. It helps you plan the sessions, what you're going to ask them to do, what kind of questions you're going to talk about. And it helps you, if you're developing a prototype with some features, it helps the developers know exactly what it is they've got to do ahead of the user testing. All of those build together the business case, the justification for why we're spending time, effort, and money to do your user testing. It also has an ethical perspective as well, because every time you bring in users into doing some user testing of your system, you're taking their time up. And you have an ethical obligation to not waste their time. If you know your research questions, you're using them for value. There's also a bonus here as well. If you know what your research questions are up front and you go ahead and do your research, when you get to do your retrospective for that sprint, you can look at the methods that you use for user research and you can find out whether they worked or whether you want to tweak the approach that you did for the next one there. Number 2, script and practice your sessions. Now in Agile, we all want to minimize documentation, and a script, well, that's documentation, isn't it? What do we need it for? A second mantra, maybe a little bit more minor, I've heard from people, that if you script user sessions and you go into them, they could end up feeling unnatural and stilted, maybe. Well, I'm going to bust that one straight away, because my second thing there is script and practice. When you practice what it is you're going to say, you lose the unnaturalness and you lose the stiltedness. So why do you need a script? Why do we need to push aside this mantra about minimizing documentation? Well, because if we don't have a script, the risk is you're going to introduce two things that are going to dramatically reduce the value of the findings you get out of user research. The first one is that you might introduce bias by using words that influence the user's behavior. So you're going to see stuff that they wouldn't otherwise do, and maybe you'll miss findings that you would otherwise have seen. The second one is you might end up chasing down rabbit holes and report findings that weren't really there and you don't really need. These things that can happen if you don't use a script are introducing errors into the findings that you've got, and obviously have implications for the decisions you're going to make going on there. And these errors are going to be familiar to anybody who studies psychology in the room, because they are common to all sorts of research methods, and they have a particular term in psychology here, type 1 and type 2 errors. Now, I'm just going to jump behind the stage here just to point out what's going on. So if you're testing something and user testing, you want to find out whether something works or not. If there's a problem, yeah, there's going to be a finding from it. Or maybe there isn't a problem, so there is no finding. What comes out of the testing, whether you've reported it or not, that's that one there. And if you don't report it, it's that one there. So if there is a problem and you report it, big tick. If there isn't a problem and you don't report it, big tick. But what about these two squares here? Well, let's think about this one. Without using a script here, if you just jump into the user session, you know what it is you're thinking about doing. There's a red, you want to find out, does the user know how to get onto the next page? Now you know what it is. It's a red button and it says free ice cream here. User doesn't know that. You want to find out whether they can figure out that's where it actually is. But because it's in your head, the risk is that you're going to use one of those words that's in there. You might mention ice cream or you might mention the color. Even seasoned user researchers sometimes slip up with this sometimes. And the user's listening to you to give them cues about what it is to do. And if you mention one of these, I know what to look for now. They go click it, and they go through. And you don't see a problem. You don't see a finding. You don't report that. And that's what we call a type 2 error. It's a false negative. And that was because you introduced some bias into the tasks or the questions that you asked them, and that changed their behavior. The second box we've got down here is my chasing rabbits example. Users come in all shapes and sizes, and some of them can be quite excitable and quite willing to talk to you about lots of different things. And they can sometimes go off topic quite a bit and tell you stuff that really becomes quite interesting. And you think, this is great. I want to write this down. This is a potential finding. But maybe it's not the research that you're actually after. Maybe it's an anecdote, and it's not behavior you've actually seen. Maybe it's not a real finding at all. And that's what we call a type 1 error, a false positive. And when we look at these kind of errors, if these are turning up in your findings or not turning up in your findings, that you're then going to use to make decisions on the changes you're going to make for the next sprint or taking it forward to try and match your user needs, these can be big problems because they can waste time and effort. So the benefits of using a script, of documenting that, is that they're going to help you reduce bias because you've worked out what it is you're going to say. And you're not going to introduce any of those words there. And it helps you. And you go do that practice, so it feels really natural. Secondly, it helps you focus on the research questions so that everybody's on board there. And there's a bonus one there. The observers know what it is they're going to do. The third one is to perform each session independently. Now, I know when you get to do user research and you've got 5 users coming in, you want to make the best of the day. One approach, and one mantra maybe, is RITE, where you go in with a prototype, observe the findings, and change for the next user, and do that and do that. Another one might be that you see the findings in the first session, and you change the questions as you go forward. And both of those kind of challenge the number 2 I had about scripting. And obviously, we can see they have that risk of biases, etc. Maybe you do use a script, and maybe you do each session independently. But as I said, users come in all shapes and sizes, and some of them are going to struggle, some of them find it easy. Some of them are going to be more vocal, some of them quieter, and some of them can articulate. And what can happen is that you can get to the end of the session and realize that your findings are coming from the one person who was perhaps more vocal and more engaging and more articulate. And maybe they were the only person who had that problem, and four other people didn't have the problem, but you didn't note it down. So it's really important to take each session independently so that you can build a solid block of evidence so you can make your good decisions on that one there. Quick recap. Agree your research questions up front. 2, script and practice your sessions. 3, perform each session independently. And now I'm over to questions. Thank you.
So in a second, I'm going to throw this open and ask for anybody that's got experience of using methodologies like this, or any trouble they've run into and they'd like to ask Lucy's advice. But Lucy, for anybody that's sort of sitting there at the moment and thinking, actually that sounds like an awful lot of work, introducing psychological bias sounds a bit complicated, I'm going to carry on getting away with the bare minimum. What kinds of problems does this solve? What benefits will people see if they introduce and invest in this kind of methodology?
The benefits.
Your headset should just...
I've been stopped over.
Use the mic for a sec. The mic's on.
Mic's on?
Yeah.
Aha, we're here. The benefits of planning what it is you're going to do, preparing for it, and managing each of your sessions independently means that you're not going to, I'm going to kind of reiterate a little bit of what I said. You know what it is you're planning to do. You don't waste any time and effort possibly following things that aren't important for the current sprint or the current thing you're actually aiming for. Secondly, it's really easy. It's really, really easy to think that user research is just about having a nice little conversation like we're having today. And that's not going to be the same thing as when people are using your system, your app, your website, sitting on the train, maybe with lo-fi. They're not going to tell you, they're not going to have that same experience. And that's what it is you want to find out, because that's what's going to be out there.
What kind of things could you catch with this, that with a lesser or more superficial methodology you wouldn't have caught? What sort of problems has it solved for you, for instance? Is it around the psychology of the user and cognitively how they're exploring things? Have you introduced things that have, as another methodology, introduced things that maybe misled users in that respect?
Yeah, I think the key thing here is your users are going to be using your apps, your websites, sitting on the train, sitting at home, at the office. They've got their own goals in mind, they've got their own understanding of things, but when you're sitting having a conversation with them, they're going to act differently. We all act differently in a social environment from sitting on our own. It's understanding the psychology of people there. Plus, if you're sitting with them, they know they're in a kind of situation where they're going to be helping you. That's also going to affect what they do and how they talk to you as well. You want to try and get to understand what's going to happen when it's out there in the world, not what's going to happen when you're having a nice little conversation with somebody who's perhaps designed it or developed it. And so it's important to understand how that situation affects what you're going to see.
Yeah, good, thank you. At this point, I'm just going to ask Jeremy to wander up and get ready. But I'm looking for any examples from anyone on the sofas who've employed this methodology and found real value in it. Is anybody using this sort of thing regularly? Is anybody involved with this kind of user testing?
I use rather simplistic user testing. I think you do a much more formalized thing, but even just getting somebody to use something you've built, even just one person, while it's highly subjective, will give you some insights that you may not have picked up. So I've started actually making people use things that I build, and they'll often pick up things that I wouldn't realize, because when you're building something, it's in this really idealized phase. You're often on a desktop, you have good light, and people use stuff in different situations. They're on a tiny phone or on a bus, etc. So just even one simple user test can give you some answers there, I think.
Okay, and are you tempted to go in more in depth with the sort of methodology you've heard about today?
I would definitely like to. It does require more time input, So I
Okay.
think even starting simple can be a good start.
So you see a little bit of trade-off with the time invested, but it might be worth it.
We've got time for one more question?
Yeah, please.
How do you go about selecting the testers to be, where do you avoid bias in that selection but also keep them representative of your users?
When you say testers, you mean the people you invite in as users?
Yes.
You look very carefully about the user profile. Maybe if you develop personas about who's going to be using your app there, and go out and recruit. And one of the key things in recruiting users is that you don't give them a clue in your recruitment process as to what it is you're going to be looking at, either what kind of behaviour or what kind of app. If people know what it is they're going to be coming to have a look at, then they can go and do homework beforehand. And I've seen that change their behaviour that's going on there. Also, people, I hate to say this, but people sometimes fudge the truth to get into research. They really want to do it. You might only be offering a chocolate bar, but some people love to go and do it, and they will tell you that they do everything just so they can get in, if they think the questions are there.
So would you blind the person who's going and recruiting the people to do that are going to end up being tested? So you tell them, we're looking for these kinds of people, now you go and find them. So that person doesn't know the app that's going to be tested as well.
I wouldn't blind the recruiter.
Okay?
I would ask the recruiter to write some very clever questions that enable you to distinguish which people you want to come without the users, without the people who are filling in that questionnaire maybe.
I guess I'm worried about bias in the selection of people who are going to give you the answers you want.
Yeah. I'm hoping that we all take an honest approach to research, and we're going out to find out whether something works or not trying to validate that it does work.
Yeah. Tough in general to avoid that kind of confirmation bias, but I guess the key takeaway is don't bribe people with chocolate. So, thank you.